when a man stands against the fading principles of Connecticut and the United States of America, a nation 250 years removed from its founding. There's only one choice to make, as Nathan Hale once proclaimed, "I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country." Jadon MacCormack stands for God, family, and the founding principles and laws of our nation. Welcome to America's 250th Anniversary Podcast.
Welcome to America's 250th Anniversary Podcast, and we are here with a very special guest, State Representative Doug Dubitsky. Nice to see you. I just want to shake your hand there. But thank you for coming on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and
Having me.
thank you. And this is such a important podcast because, of course, this is promoting, America's birthday. And 50 years ago was the 200th anniversary, and you were around during that time too, weren't you?
I was. I spent that day at a historic site in Stony Point at the Stony Point battlefield.
Wow, that must have been something. I wasn't even born yet. So it's amazing that this year we get to celebrate all that's grand about America. And not only that, but today we're in a very special location. This is Nathan's Hale homestead. And, this was where he grew up, where he was born. Obviously, he died at age 21 years old because he was hanged by the British Army. Now, something about Nathan Hale, which I just want to briefly mention about him, is that he was a patriot that marked America at the beginning stages as a success. He saw, the Continental Army as the victor, and he wanted to be somebody that fought for his country. And so at the very young age, he was in his 20s, and he started, going out there, going in the Army. He was actually promoted to lieutenant. And, of course, as we know, he was a spy. He even went onto a ship and went on a British ship where they were all sleeping one night and then sailed it back into the territory of the Americans, the United States. Well, at the point they were, the colonies. But it was amazing his patriotism that he showed. We all as Americans should appreciate is just his resilience to the American fight. And, not just Nathan Hale, but we have so many patriots. And right here we have State Representative Doug Dubitsky, which he is fighting for Connecticut. Connecticut as one of the original 13 colonies.
Was. Well, one thing you need to remember about Nathan Hale, he died at 21, but he was already a veteran. Soldiers started at 13, 14 years old back then. They were, little kids fighting. And by the time he was 21, I don't remember when exactly he entered the fray, but he'd already been in for at least 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, and that's amazing too, is the American history is people started off very young when they started deciding, okay, we're going to fight for the reality of freedom, of liberty, no taxation without representation. I feel like I'm using that in today's world because, man, sometimes when somebody doesn't vote on controversial legislation, it can get to us, and it's not representing the people. But, I wanted to really highlight Nathan Hale today at his homestead because of the American patriotism. And, of course, he is Connecticut's state hero. Now, Doug Dubitsky, I wanted to ask you your background because, of course, you're a lawyer and you fight for the laws of the land that are established in the General Assembly. And, of course, you even are the one that creates the laws. You go in there and fight for what's right. Now, what is your very beginning stage of even thinking about politics? How about even going back to before you were even a lawyer? What is your whole entire life background in a way?
Well, I worked in theater and television for about 25 years, and then at a older age went to law school, became a lawyer, worked for one of the biggest law firms in the world for about 11 years and got sick of it, and then went out on my own. Um, I was, found myself screaming at the television constantly, and ran for Congress in 2020. Wow, no, when was it? 2010. Okay, 2010 I ran for Congress. I know it's a big surprise to everybody. I didn't win. Um, and then I ran for state rep and I won.
Mm. You know, I just want to understand your beginning stages of working in television because that's something that a lot of people don't realize is the communication factor in this country is what makes it so unique. When we as Americans are able to project freedom of speech, we can have a conversation, open dialogue, and really get to the matters that, the moments that matter. And what was your experience of trying to be in that industry, seeing, the open dialogue happen? Of course, it's probably not all about politics when you're working in the industry there, but what was your feeling about how the television industry was displayed?
Well, the industry has different mindsets depending on which aspect of the business you're talking about. The the on-air talent and the producers um, are just off the charts liberals. They have no clue generally what real people go through on a daily basis. Then you have the other side of the industry, which is the production end, the lighting guys, the set guys, props, makeup, costumes, the stage hands, the teamsters, and it's a mixed bag. The more blue collar you get in that industry, the more kind of down to earth and Republican many of the people are. But I worked. I was based in New York City, so even blue collar Republicans in New York City are pretty leftist.
Mm.
So the industry is is broken up. Um, you have to very often watch what you say around the talent because they can just freak out and start screaming and yelling and ranting, and because very often they're just pampered, um, limousine liberals.
Well, so there were more narratives as well that they tried to push,
Um,
depending on what you were doing.
there's very little political narrative in like a cooking show or I did a lot of sports. There's not that
makes sense.
much narrative there. I did a lot of music videos. I did a lot of um I worked on the Olympics a couple of times. There's not much political narrative there. People generally try to, at least on air, stick to the job at hand. Um, there are, I did a bunch of comedy shows, and obviously there's, jokes about Republicans and jokes about, this and that. But
So you were more on the side of the entertainment business, right? Rather than anything politicalized or any type of ideologies that were out there.
correct. I never worked on hard news and things like that. I worked mostly on the entertainment side. Um, in sports. Sports, I guess, is entertainment.
Interesting. You know, That is a very fascinating viewpoint, of course, because when you're involved with the TV networks, you get to see the production industry and you get to understand how everything is, displayed, how things are kind of cookie cutter, and really how you project a message, even if it's not political, you still have to get a point across. And, I just find that interesting, that being part of your background. And also after you went out of that industry, you ran for Congress. Can you kind of explain, that whole entire event that you did there?
Well, I was actually an attorney for over a decade after I left the
Got it.
TV industry, and I was working for a large firm in Hartford, and I was really just getting frustrated with our national politics and the way uh, our congressman was didn't seem to be representing the people of Eastern Connecticut. He would have been much better in the Fairfield area or, maybe in a Hartford area or something like that. But it didn't seem like at least the people I knew had the same mindset as our congressman.
And to kind of highlight that, you're referring to Eastern Connecticut being on a more Republican side or more conservative basis versus how on the, west of the Connecticut River, they're more of a liberalized type of environment.
Yes, to some extent. I think a lot of it is essentially, I when I look back, I look at how the poor people of Eastern Connecticut and the poor people of Western Connecticut are so different. In Western Connecticut, in the cities, Bridgeport, New Haven, Hartford, Waterbury, it appears that the the poor people live in very tight confines. They live in the cities. A lot of their life is revolves around government subsidies of one type or another, food stamps, welfare, getting things from taxpayers, and that's essentially how they live their lives. In Eastern Connecticut, there's a lot less of that. Because there are less people, there is less less government focus on the poor people of Eastern Connecticut, and they tend to be a lot more self-sufficient. Even if they don't make any more money, they tend to get by with the resources that they have, and they tend to
Probably be more community focused if that's the fact.
yep, and they seem to be, for no better word, quieter. They don't scream and yell and demand things from others. They kind of suck it up and marshal through. And when I was looking at how our representatives, Congress and in the Senate, were representing the poor people of our state, it seemed to me like those in the east side of the state were really getting the short end of the stick and were forced to do on their own. And it just didn't seem like that was proper representation of the people of a district. And
And you saw all that happening while you were a lawyer.
correct. And I also saw a lot of the rights that Americans have had for 100 and or 200 and 25 years at the time, that seemed to be they were being eroded, and then at certain intervals being grabbed in big chunks. Gun control was a big issue. I was seeing suddenly, firearms that had been widely owned and used by the people of this country for 100 years. Suddenly, politicians were telling us that they were too dangerous for people to own.
Wow.
And
No government overreach.
absolutely. And you would think, well, okay, my great grandfather could have had that exact same firearm. Why is it suddenly too dangerous for me? And the answers I got were extremely unsatisfactory, and it became very clear that it had nothing to do with public safety. It was simply an agenda to make sure that the people of this country were not able to defend themselves and were not able to be the armed populace that our founding fathers envisioned.
Right. Wow. And that's something that, you paid attention while you were the lawyer, and you saw your liberties being taken away by a political agenda that were trying to reach into everybody's, freedoms. That's really what it was. And so, then you ran for Congress, lost, but then ran for state representative and won. So, when you are a state representative, and just kind of a side note here, I went ahead and, of course, worked at the state capitol, and then I shadowed, of course, State Representative Doug Dubitsky and then Ann Dauphiné, and I sat in your seat just for a shadowing day. And, I saw how the legislators were talking, debating bills and everything, but you do that on a daily basis when it's in session. So what's your experience from the day-to-day basis, how you fight for the freedom and liberty of our citizens, and what is your entire overview of your position and how you fight for that every day?
Well, the Capitol building really is an amazing place. It is so filled with history and grandeur.
We even have the Nathan Hale statue right inside.
We sure do. And although the building was built in the mid to late 19th century, every time I walk in there, I remember that my seat, not in that building, but in the legislature, used to be held by Samuel Huntington, the first president of the United States. And Connecticut was so deeply embedded in the formation of this nation. William Williams, Samuel Huntington, Roger Sherman, that and others. Roger Sherman was the only person to have signed all four of our founding documents. And, most people don't even know we had four founding documents. So that history and the responsibility that comes with it is really in front of me every moment that I'm in that building, knowing that the people who created this nation came from not only my state, but my district.
Yeah.
And I have a responsibility to ensure that our nation is not destroyed by a bunch of short-sighted liberal idiots who don't even know who Samuel Huntington was.
True.
So when we have bills like, we had a bill to join the National Popular Vote Compact, and what that would do is essentially circumvent the Electoral College in electing the President of the United States. Well, who developed the Electoral College and why? Well, it was developed by two guys from Connecticut specifically to protect Connecticut from the bigger states. At the time it was New York, Virginia, and Massachusetts were the monster states, and the little states, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Vermont, if it were just a popular vote for president, the little states would never have any say. And it's still the same 250 years later. That if we elected a president without the Electoral College, just based on the national popular vote, we would really only have a couple of states that would decide who the president is every time. We'd have California, Texas, Florida, and New York. And they would decide who the president was all the time, and everybody else's vote would pretty much be useless. So when I walk into that building and feel that responsibility to uphold the principles of our founding fathers from my own state and my own district, that's essentially what I'm fighting for every day when I'm up there.
Wow. You know, and just trying to go back to you fighting for the historical significance, but now we have the present significance at hand, where they're trying to strip us away from our freedom, our liberty, and just our justice system in general. You know, I see, anybody that is fighting for the truth as a patriot. I consider you a patriot because you see the truth and you want to fight for that. I think Nathan Hale would be so glad that we're here at his homestead today, just listening to this conversation, because we're fighting for what is correct and what is righteous. Now, of course, all the things that you talked about had a lot to do with the huge votes that are happening, where it comes to life-changing events like the Electoral College. We even have the gun rights, everything that comes with our freedoms and how this country is run. Is there a specific bill or anything that you've ever voted on that you would consider something that you voted for and stood alone on?
Stood alone on. Well, there are times when you'll see, we have the voting board. When people vote, you see it up on the board. There are quite a few times when I'll be the only one that's for or against something. But generally, I have been pretty successful in bringing others with me and joining with others that are also fighting this fight.
So you would consider yourself a leader in a fight to the right type of legislation?
I hate using that word. A leader doesn't say they're a leader. A leader just does things, and does things that people like and people will follow. I like to think that the things I do, the bills that I push, the arguments that I make, and my ability to move legislation either for or against, I like to think that those are things that people agree with, and if they agree with it, hopefully they will come with me on that issue.
Right.
There are times when I see one of my colleagues championing an issue, and maybe I don't know that much about the issue, and I will do a little investigation, I will read up on it, I will learn, and I'll say, I'll tell my colleague that they're either right or wrong, and if they're right, I will follow that guy. I don't always have to be the face of every issue. I don't have to be the sharp end of the spear on everything. Other people have other interests, and if there are issues that they are championing that I agree with, then I'll follow them.
Right.
There are a lot of people who get up there and claim to be a leader, and that doesn't mean they are. It just means they like to think they are.
Right.
I like to think I'm just another guy who gets up there and fights as hard as I can.
Can I ask you a little bit about strategy?
Sure.
As somebody that's a Republican in the General Assembly right now, you're not in the majority, right? You're in the minority.
Sure.
And
big time,
right? And Connecticut, has a very vast history. It's not like it was always a liberal area, but of course now in the present day it is. So since you're in the minority as a Republican, what's the strategic positioning that you have to put out there to be able to stop the railroading of bills, and also possibly ones that you can promote?
Well, I get an awful lot of bills passed, way more than my status as a minority member would indicate. But I do it without my name on them, because there are times when just having my name associated with something will automatically mean that it's dead. Will automatically mean that every single Democrat is going to vote against it. So I do a lot of work to make sure that my bills don't have my name on them. I very often will introduce them through a senator, so they come from the Senate without my name on them, so nobody knows they're mine.
Yep.
And when they come down to the House floor, I will very often not say a word, because if I get up there and start championing it, people will say, "Hey, I think that's Dubitsky's bill. Let's try to kill it." So, but Calvin Coolidge has a famous saying that it's much more important to kill bad bills than to pass good ones. And when you're in the minority, it's almost like being on a hockey team and the other team's got a power play. They've got more guys on the field, on the ice, than you do, and your job is not necessarily to score goals, it's to prevent the other side from scoring goals. So until we can get a full complement of players back on the ice, my job is to stop really bad stuff from hurting the people of my district.
That makes complete sense. And so, that is a very good strategy that you mentioned about going through the Senate and having it introduced without having your name attached to it. And then when it even comes to the House floor, then there's debate, there's dialogue, but you don't promote it as your bill or anything like that. So that is a very good strategic advantage that, have you personally been the one that created that advantage, or did you see that from somebody else?
Well, I've been here a long time, and over the years I have learned that it's a lot easier to move a bill through the legislature if it doesn't have my fingerprints on it. So I wear gloves.
Interesting. So, but just to clarify, did you create that strategy?
I guess so.
Wow. Okay, hey, that's impressive. I just want to highlight that. That's very good. And, also as you mentioned, trying to block the bad bills and in a defensive way to be able to structure the safety of Connecticut, right? You want to protect the rights, the freedoms, the liberties, everything that is good about the state. And, that is very commendable, trying to make sure that you block as many bad things out there. And of course, you try to pass good things, but that's your main objective. And so, how has that been? Of course, that is the main part of the job, right? If you're trying to block all those bad bills, how has that been going? Does that weigh on you? Is that okay? What's kind of the motion that happens when that's all you have to really have as your main goal?
Well, I'm not sure it weighs on me. It's rewarding to know that I'm preventing really bad stuff from hurting the people in my district. The way it works is that a really, really bad bill will come up, and I will do everything I can to beat it up and to make sure everybody knows just how bad it is, and to spend a lot of time focusing on the really bad stuff. And very often it'll go back either in committee or before it gets to the floor, and a bunch of the bad stuff will be stripped out. And I may introduce amendments to either take more of the bad stuff out or even to make the bill good. Sometimes I'll put in amendments that will change the bill completely. And there are times when you'll pull up a bill that's about to come to the House floor, and you might see 20 or 30 amendments. Half of them are from me, or even more. And what that tells the speaker and what that tells the proponent of the bill is that they better really, really want that bill, because they're going to have to fight for it. And because I'm going to fight against it. I'm gonna make them vote on things they don't want to vote on. I'm gonna make sure that the people of the state understand how bad that bill is and how it's going to affect them. But very often what happens is legislation is introduced by a well-meaning person who has had a constituent come up to them and say, I've got this problem, can you fix it legislatively? And they look at it and they say, sure, I'll just pass a bill. And they put up a bill and they decide to run it without understanding how that legislation is going to affect various types of people across the state. Because we are in a state with representation is based on population, so Bridgeport has a lot more representatives than Coventry. Because of that, most of the legislators are from the heavily urbanized population centers.
Right.
It's just that simple.
Logical.
So a representative from a city may have absolutely no clue how their bill is going to affect people who live on farms. They may never have even been on a farm, much less have any idea of how people live.
So they're out of touch.
Well, it's not that they're out of touch. They have a limited perspective. Their window is narrow because they haven't been they haven't been to a farm. They don't know how people live. They've never lived on a farm. They've never lived in the woods. They've never lived in a small town. So a great deal of my time in committee and on the House floor is spent explaining to the proponents of legislation what that legislation actually says, to start with.
So defining it.
Well, not explaining it, because the way it works is somebody comes up with an idea. I think that, you know, all kids should eat ice cream on Tuesday in school. All right, I come up with this idea. What I do is I either write it down or I verbally tell a attorney in my office, this is my idea. The attorney will draft it up to the best extent they can based on what I say, and then they will send it to what's called LCO, the Legislative Commissioner's Office, which is the state's nonpartisan legal staff, who will put it into legislative language, and then they will send it back.
Right.
And what comes back very often has no relationship to the concept that I gave to my office attorney. It's very often written completely different, says something completely different, and does something completely different. But most of the legislators in Hartford, they will either not read it, or they will read it, think that it does what they thought it did, what they thought it was supposed to do, or they will say, well, LCO told me I have to do it this way, so this is my bill. So I spend a lot of time reading these bills and explaining to the proponents, this is what your bill does. And I will very, very often get, no, that's not what it is. My bill is supposed to do this. I say, oh, well, that's great, but that's not what it does. You know, that might have been your concept, but the words on the piece of paper that we're about to vote on don't say that.
Right.
They say something completely different.
So you're showcasing what would happen with the action part of the bill once it would be passed, and showcasing exactly what that would take place.
Well, yes, but initially I'm explaining to them what the words on the printed paper actually say, because very often they don't know. They have this idea, kids are going to get ice cream on Tuesday. Well, the bill actually says they get liver on Wednesday. So I read it, and very often they haven't, because they say, well, this is my bill, ice cream on Tuesday. And then I look at it and say, well, you may have wanted ice cream on Tuesday, but this does not say that. This says something completely different. And how will this affect? Well, the kids in Eastern Connecticut are allergic to liver. And you know, Wednesday's a holy day. I don't know, whatever it is, you know, I will explain to them how this bill, this concept that somebody from a city with 150,000 people, how that concept will affect a town with 800 people in it. A good example is something like these mandates. You know, the state mandates that every municipality do X. So that mandate goes to Bridgeport. Well, they send it to the legal department, who finds the right department and the right department head, and they assign somebody to do X. Great. In a little town with 5 employees, it shows up at the first selectman. The first selectman looks at it and says, crap, I'm going to have to do this myself. Because we have 3 guys on the road crew. We have a town clerk who doesn't do this kind of thing. And we have an administrative assistant who is already completely overburdened.
So some things may be logistically challenged.
It could be impossible. It could be simply impossible. You know, things like the mandates with regard to low-income housing. The legislature passed these low-income housing bills. Every town in the state must have 10% low-income housing, subsidized, deed-restricted, low-income housing. All right. Well, you go to a place like New Britain or Hartford. Well, developers all, they want to build all over the place. And if they can't, you go to a place like Fairfield County. They have housing authorities with tens of millions of dollars in their budget that actually build housing and run these housing developments. They collect the rents, they maintain it, they own the land, they have full staffs. Well, you go to a place like Scotland, their entire budget, their entire municipal budget is $2 million.
And I believe Scotland is the smallest town in the state of Connecticut.
It is not.
Is it not the smallest?
No.
Okay, which one's?
Union is the smallest.
Okay.
Union has like 810 people
Okay.
in the entire town.
Scotland is right next to that ranking, though.
Yeah, Scotland has 1,600. But who's going to do it? So we had some bill with a mandate on public safety. So I got up and I say, well, who's going to do this? And somebody got up and said, well, don't worry, just get your police chief to do it. It's like, police chief? What are you talking about? We don't have a police chief. Oh, well, get your your security guys, whoever does. We don't have any of that. We don't have a police department. We don't have, there's no state trooper. If you pick up the phone in Chaplin, for example, or Canterbury, or in Scotland, and you call 911, somebody gets in a cruiser in Danielson, 6 towns away,
Right.
and at 80 miles an hour, maybe they'll get there in half an hour, 40 minutes. So, if you've got a problem in one of those towns, you better damn be ready to handle it yourself, because the cavalry's not coming for a long time. Whereas you go to Hartford, you can be guaranteed you're going to have a cop there in less than 5 minutes. That doesn't happen out here.
Yeah.
So when the legislature starts putting mandates on towns, they don't know, and very often don't care, that the small towns are not just smaller versions of Hartford. They are inherently different.
Completely structurally different. Right. That's amazing. And of course, just looking at legislation with the people that have no idea of that concept of not being just a lower version of a city, but just a completely different type of municipal, place. So, I just appreciate you having those viewpoints, though, because that's what the small towns need. In the eastern Connecticut side, and of course you actually represent half of my town, in Brooklyn, Connecticut. And so, I want to make sure that we are represented properly. And that's great that you are making that a high point whenever you're looking at this, at the legislation that's being proposed. And obviously we really do hope that these bills have so many amendments in them before they get passed, because since they are in a majority of a Democrat majority in the General Assembly, they're going to probably get passed, right? And so,
Not if I can help it.
Yes, exactly. And so, and of course you like to have so many amendments when it comes to that too. That way, no matter what, if you can't block it, you at least put in safety structure, and of course making it possible where it's not going to cause long-term effects in our state. And of course it's going to still have long-term effects, but not in a more significant way than it would have been.
Right.
So.
And that's often a balancing act. You have to decide. You see a bill and you say, all right, do I just try to kill it, and if I can't kill it, just let it go through as is, knowing that the courts down the road will find it unconstitutional? Or do I try to make it less bad, because in between being passed and being thrown out by the courts, good people are going to get in trouble and going to get caught up in a very bad bill. So, you know, it is a balancing act. You try to make it less bad and have less people caught up in it, knowing that making it less bad will make it less likely that the courts will throw it out? Or do you just let it go as it is, understanding that there are going to be people who are going to be seriously hurt by it, in the hope that the courts will find it unconstitutional? It really, it depends on the circumstance. It depends on what the bill is. So, you know, and that's, you know, one of the things that, thankfully, there are a number of strong Republicans up there with legal knowledge and have half a brain at least that you can talk to, and we can discuss the best way to address a given issue and a given piece of legislation.
Right, and of course we owe it to Connecticut, but we owe it to the United States to be responsible in that way, especially for America's 250th anniversary. You know, it's so vital that we as a nation have laws that make sense, you know, and that's something that, you know, they hate to listen to us say it's common sense, but it truly is. You know, we need to have common sense again. It's not trying to have so many different laws out there that are infringing upon us. We just want it to be basic, simple, but makes sense at the end of the day. You know, and again, just want to mention, Nathan Hale was a patriot, and what he did for our country was admirable, and we want to continue that fight in the United States, especially in Connecticut, Nathan Hale being our state hero. And I just want to say thank you, you know, State Representative Doug Dubitsky, and we're coming on America's 250th anniversary podcast. All right. Very good. See how long that was. 47.